Asian University of Women and endeavors as A Jagatai to do and help. And we will have somebody on who's very new to Asian University of Women as the Vice Chancellor, but very, very, or has a long time within the education sphere. She's been in England and some of the bigger and well-renowned schools, SWAS, King's College, LSE, University of Sussex, so she has a lot of experience in that, and now recently appointed as the Chancellor of the Vice Chancellor of the Asian University of Women. And can we please introduce our next keynote, or sorry, actually our first keynote speaker, Professor Nirmala Rao.
Thank you so much for your very generous introduction, and first of all, I think it's a huge privilege and an honor for me to be invited to address you all on this occasion of the International Women's Day just gone by. And in particular, I'd like to thank the organizers of the event, both Brand Forum and Women in Leadership, for giving me the opportunity to highlight some of the challenges that remain in achieving gender equality, particularly in the field of higher education. And the topic of today's conference, visibility, owning women in leadership, is, I think, hugely important. And at universities, we've been grappling with this worldwide for many years, and I think we'll continue to do that for some more time to come. I must admit I'm no expert on this topic, but I propose to offer my reflections both as a researcher in the field, but not in gender studies, in political science, having touched on gender studies, but more importantly as a female manager, having served for around 30 years in the field of higher education, but primarily in the United Kingdom. And as Vice Chancellor of the Asian University for Women, which is an all-women's liberal arts institution based in Chittagong, I think this session is a wonderful reminder of the advancements we've made towards gender equality. And today's focus on gender and equality issues seem to be a logical progression from the commitment to women's empowerment made by many development organizations in the late 1980s and early 1990s. We've moved on. The increasing prominence of leaders such as our own Prime Minister, Honorable Sheikh Hasina, first female defense minister in India, Nirmala Sitaraman, she's the first female defense minister, Hillary Clinton, or you can name Cherie Blair, or Indira Nooyi, who's the current CEO of PepsiCo, Mary Barra, the first woman of CEO of General Motors, to name a few, underscores the important changes in gender roles in recent years. In many countries, the number of women elected to local councils or national parliaments has increased. There are more women MPs in the UK than there were, say, a decade ago. Over 30% of elected members of parliament are female in countries, in the Scandinavian countries of Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, even Germany and Netherlands. And just in Sweden, there are more female than male government ministers. The idea that it's necessary and desirable to have a significant number of women leaders in politics and public life, I think, has blossomed in recent years. It is true that Kali Fiorina, when she assumed leadership of Hewlett-Packard, she announced that I hope that we are at the point that everyone has figured out that there is no longer a glass ceiling. But several years later, in a memoir chronicling her highly debated public expulsion from Hewlett-Packard, Fiorina recounted endless examples of the sexism she encountered in that few years she was at HP. That just about captures contemporary ambivalence about women and leadership. A recent study showed that more than 90% of surveyed Americans are willing to vote for a qualified female presidential candidate, but up from 1/3 in the 1930s. Yet only half think the country is ready to elect one. And we've seen that with Hillary Clinton's candidacy. Likewise, for more than 2 decades, women have been earning about 1/3 of the MBAs awarded in the US, yet they constitute only 2% of Fortune 500 CEOs and 8% of top leadership positions. For almost a quarter century, women have made up more than 40% of new entrants to the legal profession, but they're still less than 1/5 of law firm partners and Fortune 500 general counsel. Some of the data that Afreen has already relayed to you. Afreen, I didn't steal that data from you. Just the order in which I've been asked to speak. But over the last few decades, there has, of course, been a great deal of change in legislation, management practices, and in the adoption of equality policies and the choices that individuals themselves are making. And although gender quotas for public positions have brought women an increasing share of political leadership, they still lag far behind in corporate and elite professional settings. And stereotyped assumptions are often behind decisions not to restructure the political arena to suit women's needs or entrust women with leadership roles or even to include women. What are termed, I would say, old boys networks in the English-speaking world are powerful influences on the selection of candidates for local and national politics. And these networks exist between men with shared interests and backgrounds, and women are not always prepared to be part of these networks. And we can elaborate that. I'm not blaming the men, but there's also individual responsibility there. But despite the success of many admirable women, it's still the case that many in our culture see women as much more sentimental, submissive, docile, where men are seen as independent, adventurous, and strong. And as a result of these expectations, many women experience low self-esteem, see any progression for themselves as involving conflicts with men. And studies suggest that women have a fear of failure. But I believe more potently, some have a fear of success. A fundamental challenge to women's leadership therefore arises from the mismatch between the qualities traditionally associated with leaders and those traditionally associated with men. The assertive, authoritative, and dominant behaviors that people link with leadership tend not to be viewed as typical or attractive in women. When women achieve in distinctly male arenas, they are seen as competent but are less liked than equally successful men. I'm sure women will like what I have to say. Forgive me if men are offended by this. But by the same token, when women performing traditionally male roles are seen as nice, they are liked but not respected. In short, women, unlike men, face trade-offs between competency and likability in traditional male roles. And in leadership contexts, these biases play out on several levels, in the ways that organizations structure leadership paths and positions, in the ways that people perceive women leaders, and in ways that women leaders perceive themselves, and what they must do to succeed. At each level, a woman's qualifications for leadership roles are called into question. Organizations consistently, if unwittingly, communicate that women are not well suited for leadership roles. Just as others may view her leadership through a cultural lens distorted by gender bias, so too a woman may have difficulty developing a viable view of herself as a leader. And recent studies, again, suggest that individuals who are unable to firmly ground their self-identity in the leadership role may be missing a critical requirement for leadership development. In that respect, gender biases present a significant problem, not only for women, but also for organizations. Women leaders clearly navigate a different social and organizational terrain from their male counterparts, a terrain deeply rooted in cultural ambivalence. I just want to pause for a moment to return to my own trajectory and see in what ways I've managed to overcome some of these stereotypes and cultural norms. Determination, commitment, and resilience, I'd say, were crucial. Encouragement and wise mentoring also enabled me to overcome some of the hurdles along the way, because we know that the lack of professional role models, of mentors, and of informal networks has clearly been identified as one of the most serious obstacles to women's advancement. Equality policies and practices provide a context within which discrimination and disadvantage can be challenged, but we should not lose sight of the fact that exclusionary barriers and supportive employment practices are experienced at the level of the individual, and it is for the individual, from whichever communities they come from, to negotiate those roadblocks and plot their own route map to advancement and fair reward. I mentioned the fear of failure, and the fear of success. Personally, I had no fear of failure, but I was very apprehensive about the consequences of success. Every woman who advances in her career will have encountered men who, friendly at one point, become disgruntled and suspicious as she begins to move on. I recall when I was some 10 years into my academic career, I was very flattered at first to be designated by so many as a rising star, but I feared, rightly as it turned out, that as the star rises, new sorts of frictions are encountered. At times, it seemed better, entirely from my perspective, just to be regarded as somebody with potential, best not to actually realize it. So what does it take to succeed? I've undertaken some research of my own in women in political life, and there's a rich literature that points up the importance of competence, confidence, and self-belief. Now, the problem is that we may have all these qualities, but there are some practical things we as women have to have. First, accumulating a strong track record. And this is partly a matter of qualification and partly a matter of getting the experience right, of getting the right breaks, a foothold in a career. And there are subtle qualifications too, of fitting the expectations of how a future manager or leader should behave and conduct herself. Above all, success in the private or the public sector requires us to demonstrate very strong commitment, which often translates into long hours of traveling, perhaps overseas, as well as working at home on the weekends, all of which lead to considerable stress for ourselves and for our families. It's also important sometimes to have the courage to challenge accepted orthodoxies. Getting more women elected or appointed to leadership and decision-making positions is not enough if the systems and political culture are still primarily designed for men. It's not enough to train women as leaders without working on the changing negative attitudes towards women leaders on the part of political parties, governments, organizations, media, and the public. And the working culture and system of political parties and so on, whether public or private corporations, need to reflect this change of attitudes. And of course, there are other requirements. Continuous employment is very important for career progression. And despite sympathetic policies and helpful legislation, it remains the case that women who take time out to look after their children or elderly dependents do fall back several rungs on the ladder. And these dilemmas and challenges that we confront today are ultimately those that we experience and have to overcome as individuals. And these are just the values that we impart at the Asian University for Women. I'm not trying to showcase AUW here, but I do want to tell you how we train through our curriculum and the kind of students we take onto the university to prepare them for future leaders. We know that effective leadership by women is essential for establishing equality among sexes in terms of status and opportunity, and in reversing the social, cultural, political, institutional barriers to women's progress in society. And we recognize at AUW that fostering that leadership depends on strengthening women's access to high quality education. However, the starting point for setting up the university was that higher education in many Asian countries has suffered from poor quality teaching, resulting from outmoded and often irrelevant or outdated curricula, methods of instruction, or underfunding. In addition, the key aspect here is the critical thinking, immersion in basic sciences and scientific method, facility in language, and breadth of mind are underdeveloped. And this is across Asia. And I think there is an emphasis still on rote learning. I won't say Bangladesh as much because I'm still new to Bangladesh, but the curriculum that I'm used to in India and other parts, in a context very divorced from the reality of students' lives and a focus on very much on narrow technical disciplines from the beginning of university study. So AUW was seen as one way in which to address these issues, with a curriculum designed to provide young women with a solid foundation in critical thinking, analytical reasoning, quantitative reasoning, and complex problem solving, which are the cornerstones of a quality liberal education. We encourage the personal growth of each student including moral reasoning, learning from diverse persons and diverse cultures, and coming to appreciate the wide range of development of leadership abilities through formal and informal learning. We believe that this kind of education will empower AUW students to negotiate both their social and economic realities and will give them the edge they need to succeed. AUW expects its students to become leaders in the communities and nations where they live and to be our agents of change for the common good. Just to give you a simple example, we're only 10 years into our existence. Small but growing alumni of 540 students, 25% in top graduate schools of Columbia, Harvard, Stanford, where there are 2 PhDs coming out this year, Duke, NYU, 5 in Oxford this year, and across the globe. They are our pride and joy. And the remainder of the 70 to 75% go back to their countries, not necessarily to their communities, but they go back to their countries. Many of them in NGO sector, but also in the ministries of health, ministries of education, Ministry of Drugs and Counter Narcotics in Afghanistan. Some have served in the First Lady of Rula Ghani, First Lady of Afghanistan, Prime Minister's office in Nepal, and and some, of course, have set up their own little enterprises in the countries they come from. But overall, in line with the mission, AUW's curriculum is interdisciplinary and cross-cultural in nature, and faculty and staff engage students in applying theoretical knowledge to real-world problems. A strong liberal education, such as what we offer, we believe lays the foundations for a life of learning and thinking critically in a rapidly changing world. And it's particularly important, we believe, in today's knowledge-based economy, where technologies and production processes are constantly being modified, and the ability for continuous learning and relearning is critical for remaining at the forefront of the business and technical scientific world. So it was set up with the intention to provide women drawn from many parts of Asia, from a diverse social, economic, and language backgrounds, an opportunity to pull them into a single space where they can reflect both individually and collectively in how they're going to shape the social and economic realities of the world. They find refuge in these spaces, express themselves, they learn. And we know that in many Asian countries, the cultural, social, religious traditions still make it very difficult for women to leave their families, go to a university, and settle in a co-educational setting. So hence, we set up an all-female university, which will be accessible to many more families and young women who would not otherwise have any access to higher education. So that would have remained a distant dream. So today we have about 750 girls from 15 countries, 35 ethnicities, 28 languages, and they come from as far as Syria and Palestine and Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and most of Asia. We were also, in setting up the Asian University for Women, were fully cognizant of some of the advantages of an all-female institution. And I'm sure many of you who are familiar with the literature know that women coming out from single-sex institutions reap a lot of personal, intellectual, and professional benefits. And these universities provide space and environment conducive to growing strong women leaders. I mean, if you read all the American literature, 39 liberal arts women's colleges, you'll find plenty of it. But unfortunately, in the West, where gender parity has taken great strides, it's all female institutions have now become an unfortunate outcome. And all the liberal arts institutions are now becoming co-educational institutions. But I do believe that in Asia, we still continue to need to have all-female institutions where these women are absolutely thriving. And I've never had the experience until I came to AUW myself. And I do believe that this environment that's enabling them to grow in self-confidence, in self-esteem, without being watched all the time, there's something to be said. And I've come to the conclusion that in terms of the professional, in terms of the personal, in terms of the academic and the intellectual benefits that these women are getting, I think they are pretty unmatched. I'm not for segregation, but this is my first experience, and something to be said. Because these effects are much more likely to be felt in societies where women are still relegated to the margins. And it's true for places like Myanmar and Cambodia and Vietnam, in all these countries where our students come from. And yes, I can go on about AUW, I suppose, but I'm not here to showcase that. I just want to say that important to the understanding of the Asian University for Women, which is the only institution in the region, nowhere else will you find an institution that has, in a single space, such a diverse set of students coming together from 15 different countries. Nowhere in any institution in the region do you have 70% of our faculty coming from abroad. I'm not saying it's a great thing, but there is a good mix. Even the 30-40% of local staff from Bangladesh have gone abroad, particularly to North America, to get their doctoral studies, and they've come back. The one nicest thing that I notice about Bangladesh, I can't help comparing with India, is the growing intelligence here. People are going abroad, getting their degrees, but coming back. You won't find that in India, you won't find it anywhere else. And some may attribute it to size, but I think it's beyond that. And it's really, there are no words to describe how passionate I feel when I meet women from Bangladesh. Whenever I travel, there's always a fantastic lady sitting next to me, and she happens to have had an MPH from Johns Hopkins or North Carolina and working in a top NGO, and today I met her friend, and she, you've seen for yourself all the tremendous strides that women have made in this country. Yes, like I said, I could go on, but I want to give more time to the panel discussion. In an environment where AUW is located, we insist that women's personality is of no consequence, even to herself. The empowering of women is essential, we believe, for accomplishing change through education, accomplishing change socially, economically, and politically. But the process of empowering is not without its challenges. What may work for some may not be effective for others, and this could lead to a disconnect and tensions in reconciling different worldviews and different public and private lives. In this regard, I should like to finish by alluding to an important work I came across quite a few years ago. In a classic study of the movement of women into positions of power in village politics in India, the story is told of a village woman who asked her husband if she could attend training for election to their local council. And his baffled reply was, "But who will make the chapatis?" I leave you with this question, adopted as the title of her book, as a way of thinking one of the more poignant aspects of how women seeking to advance their position in leadership of all kinds, of any sort, how they manage their private and public worlds. Thank you.
Mrs. Rao, if you just could, Professor Rao, if you could be on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, any questions? No? I was very fascinated by this concept that you had mentioned about rising stars. What does one do if one is a rising star and it's acknowledged, and how do you sort of navigate those waters?
I'm sure a lot of my
yes, we've got a lot of rising stars here, right?
I'm sure they will probably agree with me that it's a problem that they might have encountered. I hope they've not encountered, but they probably will, because we are still rooted. We are rooted in the traditional expectations, the cultural, the traditional. It's hard to change, I suppose. I mean, what do you do? I think we just have to, it's a hard pill to swallow. It was very lovely to hear the men today, this panel, actually suggesting how women should be treated with their daughter-in-laws or daughters. But in real world, I have experienced it myself, and I don't know, it's emotionally, there's no single answer to that. It is a dilemma, and it requires change both ways. It requires change even in women to be not as sensitive and just carry on, and for men to accept that both within the household and outside. I mean, my personal life is, my husband's a medic, and it was all right when I was probably a junior lecturer and coming home at 4 o'clock and looking after children. But once you start, growing into management positions, coming home at 9 o'clock and for him to come back at 6 o'clock to look after the children was never a good idea. I mean, these are roles that one has to adjust, and there will be tensions. Like I said, there are many times I've thought it was much better to have remained a junior lecturer than face the tensions of...
And another thing, sort of very interesting, the alumni that UWC, Asian University of Women have. I'm sure there are certain people here might be wondering, how does one get into the Asian University of Women?
To get into the...
Yes.
I mean, because we have, I must say, the whole university started with a 1-year access program, which is a bridging program to university, and it started with 1 year, and then they put a 4-year liberal arts. Over a period of time, they condensed the 4-year to 3-year liberal arts, because the girls that come from it was set up with a statement of purpose. There's no mission, but there's a statement of purpose. The purpose is to attract women from very disadvantaged, marginalized communities, war-affected areas, displaced communities, to give them high-quality education. Now, the dilemma of bringing girls from certain targeted groups is we recognize that they may not even have a 12th standard. So when they were coming to access, we had a good 12th standard crop who were, because we also believed that secondary education in Asia had failed to actually prepare a student to go to a university. So we give that bridging year, and they were all progressing to undergraduate. But we put a program called Pathways for Promise in 2016, January, when we went to the garment factories. Bangladesh has got 4 million women working there. We thought surely there must be at least 200 of them who have the talent and the promise. So we went to the factory owners. In fact, you have Rubana Haq this afternoon. She was one of the major proponent of this. We went to the factory owners and we said, look, we want to test your girls. We want to take them for 5 years, and then of course they come back as managers or supervisors, or they may progress on to something else. But the condition is you pay the families the wages. That's when they would release the girls. And 7 factories owned up to that. So we recruited about 50 garment factory workers, and they sat alongside 40 displaced communities from Myanmar and Cox's Bazar. And we now have 220 of them. We give them 2-year preparatory rather than 1 year, because they need that extra time. And 50 of them are already in the first year of undergraduate. It is a very intensive program in English, maths, and other competencies, and they're rising to the challenge. Now, when we didn't have, it's fantastic, and when we didn't have the pathways, 2013, the first graduates coming out of the 1-year access and 4-year liberal arts, who are now 5 of them in Oxford, 2 in Stanford. What can I say? I'll give you a simple instance. Before I signed up the contract for AUW, they had organized an event in House of Lords in London, and they called 3 girls from the Oxford group, and Savitri, one of them is Jharkhand, very heart of Madhya Pradesh. She was asked to come and give an extempore talk, and Savitri turns up and she says, well, and the room was full of civil servants from Department of Trade and Education, as white as you could get, and absolutely didn't flap. She came and she said, well, when I joined AUW in 2008, I must admit I knew no English, and today here I am giving you a talk, a presentation on my life journey, and she spoke flawlessly and with such confidence. That,
what education can do. If I can ask Shabir Bhai to come and in onto stage and give a token of appreciation to Professor Rao from us.
I should say that?
You don't have to say it.
Oh, okay.
Hello, please, sorry, to present this. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Rao. So we're going to move straight into the panel discussion. Professor Rao is actually one of the. Thank you, Shabir Bhai.